This submitted material is a highly impassioned, fast-paced commentary script analyzing a massive US-led military operation against Iran alongside reports of domestic terrorist attacks and the cultural reactions surrounding these events.
Right.
Grouping the geopolitical developments and the domestic commentary into distinct, dedicated sections will create a much more cohesive and compelling narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what we are experiencing as readers right now is it's a severe case of cognitive whiplash. The manuscript just rapidly oscillates between these massive, historic international military updates and then highly localized domestic issues or even just peripheral internet drama.
Yeah, it's...
1 second, we are dodging B-2 bombers executing 900 strikes in a 12-hour window over Iran out of Whiteman Air Force Base, and the very next sentence, we are dragged into a localized protest in America.
Right.
Then, just as suddenly, we are pulled back to the destruction of the Iranian naval headquarters before being violently pivoted to a mass shooting at an Austin, Texas bar, and then straight into Twitter fights between influencers.
I completely see how jarring that is. But let me just play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
If the author separates the global from the domestic entirely, do they lose the core argument? Like, the idea that these two spheres are actively feeding off each other in real time. I read this and felt like the author was intentionally going for a split-screen effect, trying to show the chaos of how we consume modern conflict.
I mean, that is a very fair read of the author's intent. And I think you're right about the split-screen ambition. The problem, though, is that a written manuscript does not function like a television screen.
No, it doesn't.
It is fundamentally sequential when a reader is confronted with the sheer scale and gravity of a U.S.-Iran military conflict, Operation Epic Fury, literally taking the skies over Tehran. Their brain is operating in a macro-historical mode.
Exactly.
They need a moment to process those monumental global stakes, so yanking them abruptly down into micro-domestic culture wars fundamentally disrupts their ability to grasp the weight of that international theater. It breaks the immersion and leaves the reader feeling disoriented rather than informed.
Reorganizing the script into a clear 2- or 3-act structure is the most effective way to solve this pacing issue without losing the connective tissue.
Yes.
The author needs to physically separate the overseas military theater from the domestic repercussions, utilizing distinct, deliberate transitions to guide the audience's focus.
Think of it like a Christopher Nolan movie.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right? You have to establish the massive, earth-shattering stakes of the war in Act 1. Let the audience feel the rumble of that reality, build the tension, and establish the world, all before you pivot the camera to see how the people at home are reacting to it.
So let's lay out exactly how that looks on the page for them. For our Act 1, the author should dedicate that space entirely and exclusively to the international conflict. Group all those incredible, hard-researched details together.
Put them all in one place.
Right. Builds the world with the B-2 bomber strikes launching from Missouri. Detail the 6 months of strategic planning that went into this. Spend time on the unprecedented reality of taking the skies over Tehran, and lay out the emerging alliances forming with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Keep the reader locked in the Middle East until the sheer magnitude of Operation Epic Fury is fully absorbed.
And once that geopolitical foundation is firmly set, how do we get the reader back to America without causing that whiplash we talked about?
Well, that is where the author uses a clear transitional pivot. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. A deliberate bridge like, but the shockwaves of this operation aren't just contained overseas.
Ah, yeah.
That completely resets the reader's expectations. It signals that we are zooming in.
That is the exact bridge this piece needs. Once you cross that bridge into Act 2, you cover the domestic fallout. This is where you naturally group all those localized incidents together to show a pattern. You bring in the Austin, Texas shooting by Nidyaga Diada.
Yep.
You introduce the tragic mass stabbing on the I-495 near Washington, D.C. You detail the ideological clashes happening on university campuses like Columbia and within the broader media landscape. By structurally isolating the international from the domestic, both acts hit with so much more force because they are compounding, rather than constantly interrupting one another.
It allows the research to actually breathe. The reader gets to respect the scale of the war and then respect the severity of the domestic crisis. But speaking of respect, we need to address the relationship between the author and the audience, because the rhetoric being used here is creating a massive barrier to entry.
Elevating the vocabulary and relying on the gravity of the factual claims rather than repetitive ad hominem attacks will significantly strengthen the authority of the argument.
100%.
Right now, the text heavily relies on extreme, base-level insults, and it is actively undermining the author's goals, repeatedly calling political opponents retards, labeling broad demographics of people as garbage, or using highly inflammatory slurs. It completely overshadows the very concrete, hard-won geopolitical statistics the author has spent so much time gathering.
It is a classic case of the delivery masking the data. The author makes a compelling underlying case by pointing out specific hypocrisy, but the choice to wrap those points in insults narrows the audience exclusively to those who already agree with the premise.
It creates an echo chamber.
Exactly. If I'm an undecided reader or someone who is genuinely trying to understand the geopolitical landscape, the moment I am hit with a barrage of name-calling, my defensive walls go up. I stop trusting the objectivity of the strategic military analysis, even if the underlying research is completely solid.
Let me challenge that slightly, or at least anticipate the author's defense.
Okay, go for it.
The author is clearly angry, and rightfully so based on the data they've collected. If they remove these insults, do they risk losing the edgy, passionate, uncompromising tone that makes the piece so dynamic?
Not at all. We absolutely love the passion. The fix here isn't to tone down the passion, it's about channeling it. Maintain that apologetic, assertive tone, but replace the base-level insults with razor-sharp rhetorical takedown. Let the absolute severity of the documented events and the stark contradictions of the opponents do the heavy lifting for the argument.
There is a profound rule of thumb in persuasive writing. When a writer is angry, they want to shout. But true persuasion is quiet. It is handing the reader a meticulously vetted fact, stepping back, and letting the reader feel the outrage on their own.
That's incredibly well said.
We see a perfect opportunity for this when the text critiques the media's framing of Ayatollah Khamenei. In the current draft, the author simply calls the left completely retarded for their coverage. It is a lazy swing that doesn't actually prove anything.
Instead of that insult, the author should lean into a devastating contrast using the very evidence they found. Write something like, "The Washington Post attempts to humanize Khamenei by describing him as an angular figure with an easy smile, entirely omitting his execution orders for tens of thousands of his own people. A glaring and dangerous journalistic blind spot."
Look at the difference in impact there. It takes the author's exact outrage, but it weaponizes it through undeniable facts. Rather than schoolyard name-calling, it exposes the opponent's hypocrisy in a way that leaves them absolutely no room to hide.
We see another massive opportunity to apply this exact same strategy during the section on the tragic Austin bar attacker. Right now, the draft surrounds this terrifying event with generalized, sweeping insults about legal immigrants. It dilutes the horror of the actual event by turning it into a broad political grievance.
The author did such incredible digging here. Why bury it? They found out the individual was a 53-year-old naturalized citizen from Senegal who passed the rigorous vetting process, yet carried out an attack wearing an Iranian flag shirt with a Quran in his car and a detailed manifesto.
Exact. Remove the broad insults and focus entirely on those stark, terrifying facts. Letting those specific details stand independently creates a far more chilling and persuasive argument. When you present an audience with heavily documented realities, like a vetted citizen wearing a hostile nation's flag while committing an act of terror, the audience comes to the exact conclusion the author wants them to reach.
The facts themselves are the ultimate rhetorical takedown.
Trust the gravity of the research to deliver the punch.
And trusting the research also means understanding opportunity cost. Every sentence you write costs the reader time and attention, which means knowing what parts of the research to spotlight and what parts to leave on the cutting room floor is critical.
Trimming the peripheral internet drama will ensure that the core stakes of the international conflict and domestic security remain the undeniable focal point of the piece. The glaring issue in the current draft is how it gives roughly equal narrative weight to a historic military operation in the Middle East and the live-streamed reactions of internet personalities like Hassan Piker or Kyle Kalinske.
It creates a bizarre and severe imbalance of state. When you put a historic world-altering bombing campaign right next to a Twitch streamer's hot take, you're inadvertently signaling to the reader that these two things carry equal weight in the real world.
Right.
Spending entire paragraphs dissecting a specific streamer's false flag theories, completely distracts from the life and death reality of the 3 U.S. service members killed in Kuwait or the 148 casualties at the primary school in Mineb due to a misfired Iranian missile.
But isn't capturing the internet reaction a necessary part of documenting the modern cultural zeitgeist? The author is trying to show how disconnected the domestic population is from the reality of the war. If they cut the streamers, do they lose that cultural commentary?
They don't lose the commentary. They just stop elevating court jesters to the level of kings. By giving these streamers paragraphs of dedicated analysis, the author actively diminishes the perceived scale of the actual war, subordinate or entirely cut the reactive commentary from internet figures, and use that reclaimed space to deepen the analysis of the major geopolitical and cultural shifts that actually affect the core thesis.
Let's visualize that reclaimed space. The author should take a red pen and completely cross out the extended tangents dissecting Hassan Piker's stream, cross out the play-by-play of Laura Loomer's Twitter fights, cross out the analysis of Kyle Kalinski's reposted videos from 2020.
It's all just distraction.
It is low-stakes internet drama. Think about what happens when we strip all of that away. Suddenly, you have a massive amount of blank real estate in the manuscript. What should the author put there instead?
They should put the high-level geopolitical commentary they clearly already researched but rushed past. For instance, the author briefly touches on an interview with Patrick Bet-David, citing an incredibly powerful statistic that roughly 80% of Iranians oppose their current regime.
That's huge.
That is massive. The author should reallocate the real estate previously wasted on Twitch streamers to dive much deeper into that exact statistic.
Absolutely. What are the implications of an 80% opposition rate during a US-led military strike? The author could analyze what a regime change led by figures like Reza Pahlavi might actually look like on the ground. How does the domestic Iranian population react to the skies over Tehran being taken? That is the kind of profound analysis that keeps a reader glued to the page.
And look at the diplomatic angles the author glosses over. The manuscript mentions the unprecedented telephone coordination between Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the U.S. president. That is a historic diplomatic shift that fundamentally alters the power dynamics of the entire Gulf region.
Yeah.
This script should vastly expand on that alliance. How does Saudi intelligence support Operation Epic Fury? What does it mean for the future of the Middle East? That is where the author's brilliant research needs to shine.
If the author feels absolutely compelled to mention the media or internet streamers to make their point about domestic denial, they should relegate them to a single brief montage sentence. You can illustrate the cultural disconnect quickly, saying something like, while Allied forces secured the airspace over Tehran, domestic influencers debated conspiracy theories from their gaming chairs.
Perfect.
Hit the contrast and move on. Do not dedicate entire segmented paragraphs to dissecting their specific tweets. Keep the focus fiercely locked on the international conflict and the real-world domestic security stakes.
It really all comes down to ensuring the scale of the writing matches the scale of the events. This author has a tremendous command of the timeline, a deep understanding of the military assets involved, and a sharp eye for the diplomatic maneuverings happening behind the scenes.
To quickly recap our analysis today, first, we highly recommend structuring the narrative into clear, distinct, international and domestic acts. Establishing the global stakes before zooming in on the domestic fallout will fix the pacing and eliminate the cognitive whiplash the reader is currently experiencing. Second, elevating the rhetorical style by removing base-level insults will massively boost the argument's credibility. Let the severe facts and undeniable hypocrisies deliver the persuasive punch for you. Finally, cutting the low-stakes internet drama will ensure the focus remains entirely on the true geopolitical and security stakes, giving your best research the room it needs to breathe.
The research here is incredibly deep, and the passion behind the words is completely undeniable. By applying these specific structural and tonal edits, you are going to transform this from a chaotic manuscript into a devastatingly persuasive piece of geopolitical commentary.
It is a powerful piece of work, and it is only going to get stronger. We warmly invite the listener to implement these suggestions, revise the manuscript, and submit the work back in for another critique.